I'm Dr. Simon Walker, and I'm just going to do a very quick presentation on the best way to carry out an effective source analysis. Now, this isn't the definitive way or the only way, but the idea is it's to give you enough of an understanding for you to be able to really take apart a source and not to just work through the process in a formulaic manner, but actually to take the time to discuss it and investigate it. So, first of all, carrying out source analysis can seem confusing, sometimes daunting, but it doesn't have to be. Really, the process is quite simple, and to succeed with it, you need to be clear on a couple of things. Firstly, what actually constitutes as a primary source? Well, that's a complicated question in itself, as primary sources can be a myriad of things. However, a simple answer is that a primary source is an element created within or directly towards a specific time period or event. So this can be anything from a document, a report, a diary, an image, a painting, a photograph, film, music, audio recording, a play, a building, a piece of clothing, a functional item, a book, an article, a news report, online presence, or even a person or animal in certain situations. As well as tons of other things that I've not listed for you there. The point here is that practically anything within your eye line right now could be a primary source in the future, and therefore a multitude of things could be primary sources for the past. The point here is how you recognise, justify and use them, and it often clarifies how you can use or even recognise something as a primary source. And that leads us to the next question. What are you trying to do with the source? Now, are you writing an essay or academic text and therefore need to use the source as evidence? Are you writing an extended analysis on the source and need to consider it within minute detail? Are you presenting it for a talk or discussing it online within a blog or social media post? Are you using it for a report, a news article, or even evidence in trial or corroboration, never say that word, or contrast against another primary source? You need to know what you're intending to do with the source, as your intent could change the classification of the source itself. Let's have an example. Take a book written and published in 1916 about battle techniques during the Battle of Hastings in 1066, which makes comparisons between the First World War and the famous conflict between King Harold and Duke William. Primary or secondary source? Well, the answer, of course, is that depends on what you're using it for. If you're using it to consider aspects of the First World War for that time period, for, say, consideration of battle techniques, education, and academic research in that period, or the impact of war permeating into culture and everyday life, then absolutely. From the source, you could make a number of points about the period, its wording, the knowledge within it, and the publication that pertains to a range of contextual topics. However, if you're using it as a source about the Battle of Hastings, then it's potentially not a primary source, having been written nearly 1,000 years later after the event. No one involved in its production having been present at the original battle. At least, I don't think there's any way they could, short of time travel or an extended life period. This moves it closer to a secondary source, and then questions have got to be asked again. Is this a decent repository for information, considering its distance from the event, and the age of the source compared to when you're using it? For example, if you're looking at it in, say, 2020, why are you looking at a piece of work written on a battle 1,000 years beforehand, written 100 years ago? Confused? Well, it gets worse. Now, if, for example, you're writing an essay about the interpretations of the Battle of Hastings with the aim to identify changes or exaggerations in keeping with contextual events, e.g. a rise of militarism during the First World War, which were encouraged through enhanced militaristic interpretations of the Battle of Hastings due to public and political mood, then you're back to a political source again. back to a primary source. It's not a political one. Well, it could be a political one. Could be both. But the more important thing here is it's a primary source. Again, essentially, it's about how you use it and what you're trying to glean from it. And once you understand this, sources will shift from being these mystifying, insane documents to exciting collections and collectibles capable of enhancing your arguments. And it's incredible just how far you can take that. Now, once you understand the different versions of the sources and once you've agreed on how you're going to use that source, you now need to understand the surrounding background to the source, leading us to the next point, which is, what do you know about the period and topic surrounding the source? Now, a source is only going to give you an incredibly narrow window into the past. Think of a piece of academic work like a broken mirror, with each source a small shard of glass that alone tends to offer a distorted reflection which is hugely open to misinterpretation. That doesn't mean that the information in the sources isn't valuable, quite the opposite. But a single source, similar to like a single chocolate in an empty box, isn't enough to satisfy you. The solution to this tends to fall into two camps. The first one is using more primary sources. I'll give you another example. So if I told you a duck was bright pink, doesn't make it true. If I wrote it down in a letter and sent it to you, it's still not true, or potentially still not true. Now, if we both saw a pink duck and both wrote it down, then it's perhaps more likely to be true because we are corroborating ourselves. Still questionable. Now, if 1,000 people saw that pink duck and wrote it down, and then wrote songs about it, took pictures of it, made paintings and movies about it, then at that point we're going to have to potentially accept that there was a pink duck. Now, the size, shape and shade of that duck is likely to cause future historians and, ornithologists to come to blows during conferences and post-conference drinks in the future. But this is the art of corroboration. More witnesses, e.g. sources, more likelihood that the event occurred. However, the kind of fly in the ointment here, the spanner in the works, all that kind of nonsense, is that perception is fickle. And I've written Trixie Pixie. I don't know why I've written Trixie Pixie. I think it fits though. You know, perception is fickle and Trixie Pixie. And often individual subjectivity will throw up new versions of events ranging in a difference from slight to significant. For example, I might think the duck was the size of a small dachshund, whereas you may think that the duck is the size of a Labrador puppy. Who knows? Here you have a choice. As an academic, writing an essay or doing research, you can keep searching, keep finding and analysing more and more primary sources without end to try and pull it all together, or you turn to the source busters. Yeah, I can't believe I said that either. I'm good. I hope that I've taken the time to put like a source busters. What I mean here is academics and researchers. Again, secondary sources. Now, like the paranormal busting experts that I'm alluding to without infringing copyright, call in the specialists to rid yourself of that pesky pixie poltergeist, because they have spent years of their lives and buckets of tears and so much tea pouring through more sources than you ever could for a single essay or analysis to bring together a beautifully constructed rendering of the past that other academics will immediately set up and set upon and tear from limb like savage wolves on a full moon hunt. Nevertheless, within this jewel of knowledge is a repository of source consideration that you can use to support your own points and corroborate that single source that you had found, between checking through Twittergram and indulging in a little light box set binging, which is rather difficult to say than write. No longer do you have to sweat and wrestle with the poorly written, vague recollections of the past. Allow an underpaid and significantly underappreciated academic to do that hard work for you. And by simply including their name and surmising one of their hard-won arguments, and including their magnum opus in a footnote, you've removed the pain from the whole process, at least for you. Given your mark and something to tick, which we always like to do, and most importantly, backed up your point with evidence. Now, how do I find these tombs of majesty, you ask? Well, simply put, you need to read them. Typically, all of your courses have these mythical quest parchments called reading lists, which grant to all brave pursuers the gift of knowledge beyond measure. The trick here is not to just glance at the top one, but to read many and build up your knowledge like a siege weapon before a barred portcullis. Preparing your defence and attacks like a general on the battlefield before the question and the primary sources are unleashed against you. Cry havoc, my comrades, and let slip the books of war. I hope you're cringing. Okay, with that out of the way, you need to identify the source and recognise the value of the source, and have enough background knowledge through reading to use the source effectively. So let the battle begin. Let's engage the source. Simply, you need to recognise the following within any primary source. What is it? Why and what is it saying? And why do we care about it? Now, while that's insanely reductionist and overly simplistic, it'll get you started. If you can elaborate on these three, you're essentially sorted. So let's break those three questions down into one. What is it? Now, this is the practice of knowing what the source actually is, from its physical or immaterial, in some cases, presence, through to the presentation and motivation for the source. You don't need to write this out in a list, or even as a series of sentences, but you do need to know it. And if you don't have the information, then consider it if that lack of information is evidence in itself. So there is a range of questions you could be asking here, and I'm not going to read them all out, but think about things like, what exactly is the source? When was it created and by who? How would an audience have gained access to that source? How was it actually created and produced? Are you looking at the whole source or just a segment of it? And who is it aimed at? Is there any information missing that would help you understand the source itself? Next, we need to know why and what the source is saying. Okay, this is the big one. Put your seatbelts on your ears, we're going for an adventure, this is how we're going to do it, right? What you need to know is about the background of the source. You need to understand the goings-on surrounding the source, its creation and the period it came from or focused upon. Without knowing this, you are essentially searching in the dark with a broken torch and a complete lack of Scooby snacks. So, now you need to interrogate the source. You could strap it to a chair with a bright light, slather its feet in dog food and shout, "Dinner time, Fido." But you'd be better just going through the source in minute detail, questioning lines, images, colours, words, edges, and using secondary and sometimes other primary sources as tools to dig to the core information within the source that you can utilise and understand. This is your opportunity to challenge it, question it, and test it by comparing it to other sources, and seeing if it can hold its nerve and tell the same story. Remember, like great detectives, you went to great lengths to bring this miscreant in, to find it. Don't let it get away from you. You have to interrogate and test it. I realise I've made that sound more fun than it is, although I think it's lots of fun. So I retract that comment. I think it's great fun. Kind of questions you want to be thinking are, what's the context behind the source? Time period, particular occurrences, general knowledge, that kind of stuff. You know, why was it created? Why was the creator of it that person? You know, why did they do that to create it if it was created by an individual or a group? You're now thinking about their motivation. What are the key points within it? Can the source be corroborated with further evidence? Is the source true and false, or true or false? You know, what you're looking at here is, does it mislead? Is it presenting false information? Is it presenting what was believed to be true at the time? There are lots of grey areas here. It's not all fact and fake news. You need to get a grip on all of these kind of questions. And again, I'm not going to read them all out. Have a look at the attached. Finally, why do we care about it? Now this is it. You're going to stay on target. You now understand the source and what it's telling or not telling. If it can be trusted or is it misleading? Usually both. But, and I'm sorry to say this, but the pencil pushers upstairs are completely uninterested in your intuition. They need facts. They need evidence, they need cause. They're going to drop this case until you can justify pursuing the angle. And you need to prove this, you need evidence or it's curtains for you. You are out of the department, detective over. Not sure at what point we became detectives. Anyway, to do this you need the first two sections. And you need to be aware of the goal of considering the source in the first place. You're now justifying the source because of what is potentially within or even not within it. You've already built your arguments by this point, but you also need to understand why this particular source is the one from which you can gain the information rather than the other thousands of rogues out there, the ones that you lined up against the, what do you call it, the parade line up, and then you've gone, that's the source for me. Why that one? You need to justify this. And to do that, we need to answer some questions. You know, how does this add to your argument and your investigation? How have you accounted for the bias and the misinformation? Or what does it tell you that you didn't already know? Or what does it corroborate that you were trying to uncover? Does it tell you evidence or enhance evidence that you found elsewhere? Are you using it, you know, as an accomplice? I think I just made you the criminal. Anyway, what's the point is the big question here. And believe it or not, that's it. Now, truth be told, you could write a 5,000 word essay on a single source. It's easy done. But it can also be easy to be deceived by a sneaky source that they are your one true source. You know, your, what I like to think of as your source mate that seeks you out. They're not, they lie. They're part of a collection of sources from which you can build an excellent academic piece of work. You can't do it on a single source alone. It's impossible. This is why you've got to test each source. You've got to corroborate it with other materials, secondary and primary sources. You've got to incorporate it into your narrative argument. Anytime you do a source analysis, it's very rare that you'd be looked for to present a formulaic, this is the source, this is what it says, etc. What we're looking for is a process of narrative consideration and elimination interwoven with academic evidence and your own arguments. As a last metaphor, if you're still struggling to see the value of strong academic sources and the use of primary sources within an essay, try this instead. Think of your essay or whatever academic piece of text you're trying to write like a car that you're trying to construct part by part. if you use ineffective and poorly considered resources in your essay, it's like trying to build the car using blueprints from a Lego set. Now, ultimately, you may get a vehicle that even looks like a car, but it'll have been so much harder to construct. You have to force all the pieces together, and worst of all, it's not going to take you anywhere. Keep that in mind, and good luck.